My name is Claire Gomez and I'm the Assistant Director of Workplace Foundation. Welcome to Tess's exhibition, Return. It's a solo exhibition that's been in the making since 2016 and is here finally, which is amazing. And it's all the texts are written with performative sensibilities and grounded in female relationships. So this conversation is kind of based around that and will be held with Rachael Allen, and I'll give you a bit of a background about both of them. So Tess Denman-Cleaver is based in Gateshead. She works across performance, writing workshops and installation, and is Programme Manager of Participation and Young People at New Writing North. She is also the producer of the Women Artists of the North East Library. In 2018, Tess completed a PhD on Philosophy and Landscape in Performance Practice at Newcastle University. She has been exhibited nationally and internationally, including Town Hall Meeting of the Year with Kate Liston at Baltic 39, Instructions for Walking Women, Walking Festival of Sound in Newcastle, Without Apology, Vera Baxter in Sweden, and Writing with Sound at Audiograft Festival in Oxford. She was also a project artist for Journeys with the Wasteland at Turner Contemporary in Margate, and has created performance and audio works for Tate Britain and Tate and Ives. Rachael Allen is the author of Kingdom Land, which is published by Favour, and co-author of numerous artist books, including Nights of Poor Sleep, Almost One, Say Again, and Green at an Angle. She is a poetry editor for Granta. It's my pleasure to introduce you.
Thank you. Hi everybody. It's really nice to be here in the space, to be here with Tess, and to be surrounded by this really extraordinary work. I arrived 45 minutes ago, so I've sort of been getting my bearings with the space and the pieces and how they communicate with each other. So I might be taking quite rapid notes as we talk. So forgive me for doing that. But it's really, really lovely to be here and to talk to Tess about her amazing show. Tess and I were trying to figure out how we knew each other, and we were both doing PhDs at the same time, and in amongst a quite sort of maybe drunken night, we developed a nice bond over working together, and I became interested in her work and she became interested in mine, and that was very pre-pandemic, so it feels like a nice relationship coming full circle with my being here and talking about her work. And I wanted to kick off by talking about some of the sort of central ideas that I picked up on in the pieces in the show, and some of the documents that accompany it, and the photographs that accompany the texts. And I felt like there's a really incredible sense of these images and these texts and these booklets being networked in a way that feels like a kind of partly obfuscated public archive. I was thinking about the way that the broken pot is referenced in Return, and obviously the various ways that the broken pot is kind of obsessed over or interrogated via these different kind of viewpoints and sort of perspectives. And alongside that, I was interested in the kind of way that you choose to obfuscate some things. You sort of hide quite a lot of what could be quite personal narratives or interior stories, but then there are some things that you make public, but with a kind of obfuscated aspect to them, like the broken pot's kind of obsessive presentation, but behind that we're not really sure what kind of story lies behind it. And there's an obliqueness in the writing that I think is really alluring, really interesting. It kind of paints enough of a picture for us of familial or intimate or romantic relationships to clarify an emotion in the reader, but it never dictates a kind of narrative or story. And I'm kind of interested in your like formal frameworks, the way that you chose to present this exhibition, the kind of idea of archiving, and how you sort of settled on this quite fragmentary mode of presentation with the work.
Yeah, I'm just trying to organise the thoughts I was having while you were saying that. Also, thanks for making our meeting sound so graceful. I think there's something that I've been aware of in how I write, that I hadn't really attached to this collection until you were just speaking there about, I think sometimes it is obfuscation. I think sometimes it is like the photographs of the pot are obviously very intentionally photographed from different angles, multiple angles, so it's a kind of inspection of this object, but also in an inspection that is not necessarily clear it's all a single object. So there was quite a lot of work that I did with Jade Sweeting, who helped me create the photographs, to photograph them as if they were a museum artifact, so in a kind of very seemingly neutral way, but then to flatten the image and make it almost difficult to work out what the scale is. And so you're not quite sure why you're looking in such detail at this thing, and is it a landscape or is it, like, you can't really tell how big it is or where it is, or so there's quite a lot of work put into that, but there is this kind of intentional examination of an object from multiple perspectives or angles, which then I think happens in the writing, and I've been aware of in my writing previously, that I'm trying to explain this very particular moment or feeling or
occasion.
Yeah, occasion or sensation or something. And so to try and create a complete version of that thing, I'm trying to give it lots of multiple... There are multiple ways to explain that. So that might be formally, there are lots of multiple ways to explain it. With, like, in previous work that's been much more performance-based, it might be with sound and visuals and text and movement and lights or whatever. And that they all build up this kind of seemingly comprehensive picture of a single thing. But they also give so many different versions of it that you can go where you want between all those different versions. So I'm, like, simultaneously examining something and making it like disrupting the clarity of it or something, in the same way that I'm examining this piece of pot, but I've made it a bit difficult to work out what scale it is, and actually it's not clear that it's all exactly the same piece. But I think there's something less intentional in it as well, which is that in the writing, maybe less so, but some of the work, particularly in Return, which is the booklet that is at the front rather than on the wall, it's like a failure to explain it, that I'm trying to explain something, and when it comes out, it just isn't working. So then I can just try and collage all of these failed descriptions, and maybe in there you'll get it.
I feel like the idea of failure to represent, and also the necessity of perspective shift or perspective change on any given kind of object or occasion or sensation, feels like a really integral part of the show. And that would also make sense when you think about the various kind of practices that you inhabit: performance, text, photography, these broken ceramics, photographs. And you mentioned Jade Sweeting helping you out with the photographs, and I noticed that Jacob Polly is thanked, who's an amazing poet.
Yeah, he helped me with so there was a point where not all of these works had been written, but Return in particular, I knew it wasn't finished, but I couldn't really, like, push it any further. And I worked with Jake on kind of on how he performed his book, Jack Self. And then through that, I got to know him and asked him to support editing the work. And he was, like, yeah, he was just brilliant. And what the biggest thing that he said, actually, which kind of relates to that failure to describe something, was that when I was talking to him about, like, we just talked about the aeroplane that was in the park, and I told him this kind of extraordinary story about how there was actually an aeroplane in the park, and he just said, that's amazing, right, just please write it down in, like, and it wasn't that I was trying to be obscure or, like, trying to be really clever with language, it was just that I was, like, tumbling out and I didn't have a great deal of control over it. But the big thing that he did for the editing of all of the work, and I guess how I write, was just try your best to tell the story like you would tell it to your friend in the pub.
Yeah.
And then add that into the other, like, more, I guess, like, sensorial or abstract images.
Yeah, there's like a bit of creative writing workshop lore, I think from my friend Jack Underwood, where someone was like, I saw this log get electrocuted on a beach in a storm and I just can't seem to find the right way to kind of approach that. And he was like, that's the cool thing. Like, you've just got to write the log getting electrocuted. Like, that's the poem.
The work for you,
yeah.
So I don't need to like turn the aeroplane into something. It already exists as a weird thing.
And it feels quite nice. I mean, it feels like there's a lot of collaboration happening within the show, a kind of collaboration with other people, but also a collaboration of different kinds of materials and different kinds of practices. I don't know if that's something that feels like maybe has come together. Now you're sort of sitting in it.
I was saying before, it's really different work to my previous work. So previous work I've made has generally been performance, and it's been like before this show, in that attempt to try and explain something or talk about something from multiple angles, there's been like all different mediums in it. And then I've worked with different, so like I would work with a lighting designer and I might work with an artist to create a set, or people who support the development of the writing and stuff. So I think that collaborative background is from there. But this show feels like super stripped back, like the materials and mediums are inside the work rather than in the event or something.
I'm going to ask you about hometowns and homecomings, but maybe this is a good opportunity for you to read some of the poems to break up the chat.
What do you want me to read?
Maybe read... Well, I like them all.
That's good.
My favourite is that one. But I think you could read like 4.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's only 6.
You could read 6. Maybe if you read 4 now and then 2 at the end. We planned.
Maybe I'll read Dry Rot. Because it feels like it doesn't go too far away from what we've been talking about already. It started with a mushroom on the windowsill that I pushed at like a small blob of chewing gum under a desk. It had risen up through the basement to my first floor flat. It turned out the building was riddled. They wrapped my belongings in polythene, built a temporary corridor that I wandered through on weekends. A soft film of mist cast over my life like a gently lit stage set of an old sci-fi film. I photographed the bare bricks and the clouded shapes of my 20s. Should we read another one?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So this is part of Return, which is a bit longer. After the corner flat at the end of the road, my family moved into the big house behind the shops. Some kind of very bohemian and probably imagined setup with lots of children. They went into business together, they had babies together, they made mistakes together, they moved to the country and forgot to phone each other between parties. Scaffolding was erected around the building, and its interior left to dust and pigeons. Forgotten slips of paper, the marks of a family filling a space, a broken door handle that no one ever remembered to fix, a flower stencil pattern to make a child's bedroom, a derelict home of your own. This is a ceremony, a marker in time, a passenger plane, a full-size, real-life passenger plane for all our recreational needs. This is a scaffold, a ladder to climb into your old home and pour through the debris. Maybe it's just coincidental. Partly it's coincidental. There's no connection. They're just photographs.
Thank you, that's really nice. Thinking about the text as a whole and also the pieces that you've just read, and knowing that a lot of the work in this show is about maybe coming back to the place where you grew up and choosing to sort of settle here as an adult, is something that's always really interested me as somebody who comes from a very small town on the other end of the country. I'm from Cornwall. And I felt a very sort of strong or imperative sense of wanting to escape. And now that I'm older, I feel very drawn to going home. And I think that something that maybe defines that also in your work that I'm picking up on now is a kind of precariousness of adulthood that feels like it's talked about in the kind of the inhabitation of these sort of flats. That mushroom really stands out to me as some kind of like infiltration of the unexpected external world into an idea of home. And I think that these like shifting ideas of places that we live in is something that interests me about your work and the statements that you've made about what it's meant to come back and make work here.
Yeah, I hadn't intentionally selected a piece about a mouldy flat and then like derelict houses. I guess in terms of those two pieces, there was something about, so I live in Bentham, which is a part of Gateshead, like up the hill. It's a very, I think, normal, it's not normal to everyone. There's like nothing really particularly special about it on first appearance. It's a very deprived part of the northeast, and a very kind of mixed community. And I was born there to a family who were working in the arts and were artists and were kind of doing well at being artists in the northeast, but were broke and living in a shit part of town, in some various like complicated family setups, as I described with the parents thing. So I moved back there. I lived in town for a while, but then I moved back to Bentham, partly for economic reasons. It was the only place I could afford to live. But there was something about walking around this place that I didn't have like an everyday relationship to, but had been very close. And I'd like walked up the hill to go and like look at Bentham because I felt like I had a historic version of it that was sort of problematically romanticised, because it was romanticised in the way that you might romanticise aspects of your childhood. But I was romanticising aspects of a childhood in a part of town that is not romantic in lots of ways. And I guess I was kind of interested in how that played into my identity and kind of in relation to class. I think when I started writing Return, less so when I finished it, the question about kind of how you perform or understand your own class was a big part of the writing process, which is a bit more buried in the work now, I think. But there was a sort of strange sensation of feeling like I was walking around this place that I knew the addresses that we had lived in, and and I'd walk past a house and go, oh, I've been in that house, but which family member was it? And I could remember like the dynamics of the steps down to a door or something. And I knew it was part of my childhood memory, but I couldn't necessarily say, oh, Auntie Wendy lived there or whatever. So then living in a place where these kind of skeletal houses or like weird ghost things are. But then actually one of the things that I also told Jacob Polly was that my oldest brother told me this amazing story, which was that multiple aspects of the family, like multiple couples, lived in this big house called Woodbine Villa in the centre of Bentham. Then they all had to, in some like collective whatever, they all had to move out because they were going to turn it into flats and they were evicted. But they never turned it into flats. They just put scaffolding around the building, and then all the kids who hung out in the back lane in Woodbine Place would go and climb into the derelict house.
Wow.
But it was a derelict house that no one had lived in since they lived in it. And that just felt like too much not to do something with it.
Definitely.
And then I guess the dry rot thing, there's a sort of there's also a distancing thing that maybe that dereliction does, which was that I could go into this flat and look at my life through a sort of film that I can kind of barely remember that, but I still have those photographs that you can look back on and be like, oh, these are all my belongings in this mouldy flat that I'm not allowed to live in temporarily. So I guess they both function as like trying to look at your life in some respect.
Yeah, this archival response feels like a kind of building towards a memory bank, or a way to sort of concretize or like timestamp things that you remember, albeit maybe vaguely, or sort of some things you'll remember more clearly. But I really like that kind of arm's length distance, or almost kind of objectifying curatorial kind of method to sort of pass these things out and sort of treat them in different ways, so that you then kind of achieve what we were talking about earlier on, which is this like various perspectives on even your own memories.
Yeah, and maybe that's also a kind of questioning of like, why do I want, like I wanted Bentham to be something that was kind of romantic, and I wanted to remember these, that I wanted it to be a place in a certain way, but then that was kind of how to negotiate that when you then live there again.
Yeah.
And I think maybe there's something that in all of them, like I think there's something in the dream that I'm helping a ewe give birth, which was like, in the writing of it, I was asking like, why do I want this memory to be this particular thing? Like, what is my relationship to that memory, rather than just what is the memory itself? Or
Give us a read of it then. This one's my second favourite.
Oh, okay. Oh, you said that one. Okay. Yeah, so this one's, I dream that I'm helping a ewe give birth. That summer we push on, up and off the path. Our route fades to waist-height bog grass, and we shuffle our feet to feel the ground, moulded with dried-out gullies. Impassable after rain, but doable in a heat wave. The hillside is littered with sheep carcasses, open ribs and a radius of silence. I follow her bare legs wading over the hill ahead of me. After 63 days, they showed her a photograph of a future, from 1 through to 3. Deep grey and glowing, fixed and wanting, smudge-faced and quickening, a small curl of a self chasing its tail. I'm in the library when she tells me, and I cry into the screen of my phone. Later that day, we drink tea on my roof and hold our excitement. For the first time since winter, we feel the heat of the sun. We float lost hours in the future. After 126 days, her elbows began buckling, and the floor rose up to meet her face. She was telling me about layers of cloth and viscosity, and I voiced to catch her. She bent double and screamed through next-door neighbour's wall. I hold out my hands big and cupped. I don't mind the mess. I will catch you in the bowl of my hands. I count backwards from 10, push into the toss. The backs of my hands ache as her bones drop. I dream that I am helping a ewe give birth. I pull on the legs and feel the texture of the afterbirth in my sleep. She is watching and encouraging. She is pleased. All that is left is photographs of futures and a curved sheet of ceramic the size of my cupped palm. A line of a water stain shows where a plant sat. The brown ribbed glaze follows the finger-made surface, and a heavy line of blue gathers in the underside of the rim. Life vibrated out, quivers still in our eyeballs while we sleep, eat, walk, talk, and smile otherwise.
Thank you.
When I started reading that, I remembered it's really, really sad, and I felt like I should have warned people.
It's really, really moving. I was sort of sitting with that poem for a while and kind of embedding myself in the various approaches I think you bring to the text. It feels really material. There's so much kind of bodiliness. But there also feels like a kind of a weird sort of statistician or like data language that you bring to that poem as well, that sort of creates this kind of obfuscation that I was talking about earlier. It feels quite like calendarized or timed in a way that really rubs up against the more textured, textile-y materiality that feels more organic, perhaps. And, you know, that's something that, again, I feel is quite networked with the show. It's this kind of friction of textures and friction of practices and approaches that just feels like it creates this incredible mesh of meaning and mesh of narrative and mesh of story. It feels like you can sit with a poem like that and you can render from it so many different meanings.
Yeah, which maybe is a bit like the museum artifact thing, that there's a kind of cataloguing of this object, and a sort of faux neutrality to it or something. I don't know if that's the right way to describe it. But that with an image, which in some of them isn't that easy to decipher, actually. There's a kind of pretense to, neutrality.
Even the central conceit of that poem, if you begin any kind of poem with, oh, I dreamed this, you're automatically at arm's length from any kind of emotional centre that poem may have. So it's like you're always constructing these kinds of frameworks, or not barriers, but sort of scaffolds, perhaps, that hold up the kind of more interior and emotional work in a way that feels kind of more manageable or something.
Yeah, and I guess with that one especially, it kind of makes it slippery that you can't identify the subject, that it's a composite of multiple stories actually, and I think I probably did purposefully make that one obfuscating, but not in a way that was like to protect identities or whatever. That was about me navigating multiple stories that were all relevant to one another.
Feels very mapped.
Yeah. But it starts with a story of getting completely fucking lost and it feels quite dangerous.
And I love dream poems. They're my favourite poems.
I hadn't even thought about that as like framed as a dream poem. I thought it had that dream in it, which was a dream that happened during a period of life. But yeah.
Yeah, if you say, I love it when people tell me their dreams as well. You know, when people are like, don't say dreams or drug stories. And I'm like, I only want dreams and drug stories. Just something to sort of loop back to, I don't know how timey we are, but I was just interested in, we've briefly touched on sort of, I mean, this is just something I'm personally interested in, especially when we're making artwork adjacent to it or around it or looking into it, is how we navigate kind of class structures, especially when we are maybe talking about the places that we grew up that, you know, are sort of known for being in poverty. Where I grew up in Cornwall, if I often say that to people, they're like, oh, it's lovely, really lovely. And I'm like, oh, it's so destitute where I came from in Cornwall. And I think that I almost have a sort of opposite way of treating the landscape down there, which is like, I'm always trying to not be anti-bucolic, but to find a way to treat a history of the pastoral that actually feels sort of even more ancient, like about sort of labouring and farming and what it means to sort of be on a land that's quite hostile, actually, and as perhaps, you know, only more recently like a mega holiday destination for David Cameron et al. And I guess that leads me to sort of, well, two things that you mentioned and something else that I wanted to talk about, this idea of just landscapes in your work, how you treat a kind of ecological or natural sort of image or scenario, pictorial scene, and also this approach to class. And I guess the two are kind of embedded, especially when this exhibition and these pieces are so rooted in place.
Yeah. The landscape thing I think often is, which I don't know if this answers the question, but it's quite often driven by a formal challenge that I set myself. Like, how can this pot become a landscape? How can a collection of images of a single object become a kind of composite landscape? Or how do you create a landscape, not like a painting of a landscape, but a like sensory experience of landscape in the work for a reader or a listener, so that the language is kind of a multi-sensory experience of place that isn't a description of a particular place. So I think there's like a formal challenge in there, which I'm interested in and probably motivates some of the writing. I think the landscape in terms of class is the landscape of Return and Bentham, because I guess that is the landscape that I grew up in, which is like residential, urban, near the city. I kind of had a question for you, because I was rereading some of Kingdom Land the other day, and I'd forgotten how gruesome it is, and because we'd had a brief conversation about writing about a place that you're from and how you depict that place. And because I think, I guess it made me think, how would I write about Bentham if I wasn't here and I wasn't presenting it anywhere near here? But I know that my family and my friends and people who've lived in that place and still live in that place, like Fiona, will see that depiction. But I presume you wrote Kingdom Land not in that place, but then it's going to be read by people who live there. That it felt like there's like an amazing confidence to portray a place.
It's nice to think about this stuff because you always have a personal idea of that place in your head that feels like very private or something. And when I think about Cornwall, I feel so much affection and sort of like rage and sort of distaste, also kind of longing for Cornwalls that have like gone by, and a Cornwall that was existing even when I was a kid that doesn't really exist anymore. You were talking about this derelict house. There was a big old farm just in my village that was completely decrepit for years and was squatted by people, and it was so dangerous, and we just used to like walk along the beams and like throw rocks at each other, and it was just like very kind of feral, you know. And that got turned into this like incredibly beautiful holiday let that's now worth like millions of pounds in my village. And just walking past it feels like I don't really know how I settle myself on that change, because I know that somewhere like Cornwall, or where I'm from in Cornwall, it needs regeneration for the people who still live there and my parents who still live there and work there. But there is this tension always, I think, between, you know, what you think is right for a place, how you respond to a place. Cornwall's incredibly beautiful and rugged and brutal, and, you know, Cornish people are amazing, and I feel like I will go back and live there because it's like one of the best places in the country. But I do have a very, sort of like complicated relationship with it, as we all do with the places that we're from. And I don't think I've resolved that yet, and I probably never will. My dad's family's like Cornish, like deep, like it runs like generations and generations and generations. And he grew up in a farming family. That farm collapsed. And I think that, you know, Cornwall is quite specific because the industry has died over a number of years. It's not been like a rapid collapse of like tin mining and farming. It's been like a really slow, accumulative decline against this kind of like outrageously gorgeous coastline and Mediterranean feeling kind of beaches at times. So yeah, it's a place of contradictions, like everywhere. But I think Kingdom Land came out of those tensions, probably. But I did have to show it to my mum and dad first and be like, what do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, maybe one of the tensions that exists in Return in terms of place is that I think I'm one of 6 children. And I think my experience of Bentham and the place that I grew up, partly because there's such a big... My oldest brother will be 50 next month, and I'm 35. I have a younger sister. His experience of Bentham was a different generation's experience of Bentham. And the way that they speak about Bentham and the reasons that we left Bentham is very different to my feeling of being there. And the stories that, like, even recently, one of my brothers was telling me about being at school in Bentham that are horrific for a child to have lived through. That is really problematic, with me thinking that it's this like basically romanticised artist, working class, bohemian, like, I don't think I have that anymore, but I think that's partly where that came from.
I think it's really powerful to have the show here, to be kind of reckoning with that tension, to be presenting this, I don't know, it feels really self-reflexive in a way. It's like talking about it while talking about it, if that makes sense. Clever, it just feels very like cleverly done, and also like a gesture towards love for a place and a gesture towards trying to hold those memories intact.
Yeah. And I think something that I talked about a lot when I first wrote it was like how you perform that class, and that I think to come to terms with moving back to Bentham, I started to like perform being from Bentham, like it defined me in a way that I might have never mentioned it before. But I had to like own it, like own Bentham, for that to be okay that I was moving back there, and like reckon with questions of success and presuming you were going to leave and stuff.
Yeah.
So I think that poem also came out of like, why am I doing this? And it's never really been.
Yeah. I remember when I went to uni, and in the summers and Christmases, I'd go back from uni to work at Morrison's, which is where my mum works, and I worked for ages. And they'd be like, oh, the city girl's back. But not in that accent, obviously, in a Cornish accent, which I don't have anymore. But yeah, I understand that kind of reaction that feels quite performative, but it's always dealing with a kind of loss or something. It's like a loss of an idea of what it might mean to be somewhere else, and a reclamation of what it means to sort of come back. Like, I really hate this idea of, especially, you know, living in London now, having lived in London for a long time, it's like not only hostile to artists, it's like absolutely impossible to be there and make work and be healthy. And I think that we should eradicate this idea that, you know, London is this like centralised art place, and make good stuff elsewhere and show good stuff elsewhere that's rooted in the places that it's like.
Yeah, and I guess lots of the work was made for Bentham or for here.
Feels very loving. That's what I wanted to talk about as well. There's a lot of intimacy in this show, and a lot of kind of romance and sort of gestures of love and adoration that do feel not hidden, but you sort of have to really take the whole in to realise that it is like it's a love letter to lots of different things, I think.
Yeah, and I think I described it in some of the copy for the show as like, they're all gifts of some kind to women. I'm like really reluctant to define what the relationships are, because I want other people to do whatever they want with them. But yeah, a lot of them were a kind of, I guess that's part of the title, like a returning a favour, or returning affection or care, or an acknowledgement of various women who occupy different roles.
It's amazing.
Maybe I should read something, and then we could...
Oh yeah, let's close it.
Yeah.
Close it up.
I don't mean to close it.
Oh no. Well, I've not been looking at all at the time, so...
Okay, I'll read one that is very much a landscape thing, and one that is about putting things away. So this one is called Shepherd, which is basically just named after Nan Shepherd, and isn't a super clever title, but it's quite nice to name her explicitly. As we enter the mountains, it becomes grey, and the wind on the water's surface turns to ice. We keep looking at the sky as it begins to fade, soft, fleecy. On the first night we walked close in the dark. The tension of our new relationship stringing us together. Your sleeve warm inches away from my arm. Treading together, away from the streetlights, we fell silent. Maybe concentrating, maybe unsure, maybe taking in the gloaming snow or the blinding light of the house up ahead, into whose garden we could be about to trespass. A front window and a light burning. It is almost too dark to see. Are you nervous? Am I nervous? Your nervousness encourages me. Every step on the frozen earth is a dare, daring one another to move away from the lights, moving away from the orientation of a starting point, giving our weight to the ice underfoot. Every step is a question which, when asked, commits us to innumerable risks. It is an odd road to be walking. One can hardly tell which is the water and which is the land. When I am her and when I am me, who is leading? Not for the first time, the possibility of turning back is aired.
I love that ending.
Let's go with this one. 5 photographs. I keep pulling the same 5 photographs of us out of the suitcase. You are telling me something and my head is bent with listening. We look directly into the camera, some boy or other. They are full of us. You are wearing my grandma's necklace and my hair looks amazing. Disco bullies, the last ones standing, the end of a phone line. I decided to hold you at arm's length and you have chosen silence. All our 4 a.m.s are collected in a brown envelope in a suitcase under my bed.
Thank you. It's been so lovely to chat to you. Are there any questions?
Yeah. I mean, one thing I'll just say also, I've lived in Belgium for 7 years, and I could listen to you talk about it for ages. It gets under your skin. I could talk about it for days. It really, it gets under your skin.
It is an amazing place. It looks normal when you walk through it, but there's like some extraordinary dynamics.
Yeah, I've realised in sort of the past, maybe just the pandemic, I'm very attached to, or I have become very attached to it. And I can see Woodbine Villa from the back
Just behind your house,
yeah. I wanted to ask you about place in relation to how the poems are presented, and maybe how they're presented in relation to the photographs as well. Because Kingdom Man obviously is a book that has a kind of a different sort of mobility and relationship then to the place that you're exploring. So I wonder if you could say about printing the poems and presenting them in this way here in Newcastle.
I had a completely different idea for how to hang the show, which was not as good. But I think it was an anxiety about not understanding how they would work as a spatial experience in a gallery, and wanting it to. I didn't want the focus of the show to be performance. I wanted people to read in their own time or have the opportunity to move around text and not read all of the text, and you might read one and then skip through them, and that kind of network thing that you mentioned at the beginning, like you might vaguely pick up on the fact that the pot is referenced but not kind of read in detail as you would at home in a book or whatever, but I wanted that reading experience in the space. So I had essentially imagined it as pages of a book, and that there would be a layout that paired things as if it was a double page spread. But that was very boring and like quite narrow-minded. So yeah, we spent some time kind of trying to disrupt that, and I think more successfully allow for that like skipping between stuff. You might pick up lines and not read them as like a contained unit, which I think then works with the photographs being like they don't they can like you can look at one as a single thing, but that they're sort of designed to create an atmosphere that you move between. Yeah. So I'm glad Miles had the show and I didn't.
That's not true.
No, we totally did it together. I'm not saying but
there was a real sense of rhythm and punctuation and tension, and it was really interesting, that process of starting to feel the presence of particularly like initially the photographs in the space, in the architecture, and as a sort of physical relationship, initially probably quite intuitively, I think, and then playing with that tension and giving the rhythm of the texts. And I think when we started to settle on something that felt comfortable, maybe teasing it away from that. So there's this sort of interplay between, quite a dynamic interplay, wasn't there, between a sort of a kind of comfortable, harmonious feeling, and then maybe something that felt slightly off.
Yeah, that everything was kind of pulled away from any sort of symmetry or pairing, so that you can't obviously, there's not an obvious route around it, or there's not, like, I guess this wall possibly puts that image with this, but that a clarity of that yeah, was sort of disrupted.
Fragmented, in a way.
Yeah. And then the black ones just looked better together in the front, which I'd imagined them being all mixed together, but yeah.
It was I really enjoyed it.
That was fun.
Fun experience for everyone, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Because there was several of us involved in discussing it.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and it was, well, I've not made work like this before, so it was kind of I didn't have a way of imagining how to hang it. I guess I had books as a reference and not a gallery.
I wanted to ask you about the process of thinking about this exhibition, because if we go back several years now
Yeah.
to when I first asked you to do a show, we've kind of, everything's changed.
Yeah.
The whole world has changed. We've moved galleries, you know. I'm kind of interested in that.
Yeah, what was supposed to happen when COVID wasn't a thing, I don't think. I think it was supposed to happen in January 2020, but we started talking about it before COVID was like on the horizon. I don't know what. Well, one of the things was that you asked me to make a show after I think I'd presented Return at the Women Artists of the North East Library exhibition, and that was a performance. And so then I was working on text and was kind of a bit nervous about making an exhibition because I didn't really know what the visual element of it was. And you very generously said not to worry about that, really. I was like, okay, I'll put some poems on the wall then. So the photographs came out of the invitation to make an exhibition, and I realised that this part had kind of recurred in some of the texts, and also that like using photographs in the writing, it made sense to pursue that. I don't think I ever imagined it would be this minimal or like clean. I also think there's like a very practical reason why the show ended up like this, which is that or a different type of motivation, was that I historically have made like big projects that involve lots of people and lots of events and lots of project planning and lots of management, and I kind of burnt out on that with a show last year that I made with Kate Liston. I don't think I burnt out in a like mental health burnout way, but I was just like, I'm not doing this anymore. It was not allowing me to go where I wanted with the work and develop artistically. So since that original conversation and invitation to make a show, I had decided I wanted to focus on the insides of the work and not do a public programme heavy thing. Which is also, it's kind of a question about the labour of making show or the economy of making shows. I don't really know how interested in that conversation I am. But it was definitely like it was partly a pragmatic thing, that like I'm not going to slog it to run a public programme every week because it won't allow me to finish writing the work. So that's kind of how it arrived at this.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Do you think that was possible to do so because you already had the support of a gallery and there wasn't necessarily a pressure to make a public programme?
I think there's sort of two things. One thing is that Claire and Max and Miles and everyone who works here has been great at like organising the events and stuff so that I can turn up and have a glass of wine and talk to Rachael. So like that was taken off my hands and which I'm really grateful for. But I think it probably also relates to like moving on or changing tack with the work that I was making, and maybe a bit of a confidence to not feel like I have to over-deliver, that I can just finish this work and put it up and leave it, and I don't have to like do more, and maybe that's kind of a shift in how I felt about making stuff, which I think also relates to like versions of kind of career success and stuff that I just don't give as much of a shit about anymore. So I just wanted to like finish writing some poems and give them to the gallery and anyone who comes. That I didn't have to constantly be there proving that I was like doing well or something. Like I think I've really detached from those things.
I think that's visible in the show, in the minimalist, like there's a confidence in the work that's really like as an audience it's really, and as an artist it's really nice to see that this is more than enough. Do you know what I mean? Because in my own work I'm often of that kind of, I need to do more, I need to justify this, or that's not enough. And actually when you come in here and you realise the work does more for you because there's
less around it.
Actually that's really, there's a real strength in that, and to kind of to enjoy that. Like it's a gift to us as an audience, so thank you for reminding us that we don't have to.
Thanks, Helen, that's very nice.
Yeah, a lot of people are reacting to the like productivity complex around making stuff and showing stuff, and the idea of like what success looks like.
Yeah, and like who the audience is, which I think is a big conversation that I had, which I was really influenced by a conversation with an artist called Nadia Hebson, who used to be based here, who was like I collaborated with, but also we would kind of, I don't know, like riff off each other's work for quite a lot. And she kind of, I think since I've known her, had a big shift in who she thought the audience was, and like if a couple of your friends like it and respond to it and get something from it, that's enough of an audience, and you feed off that audience, and rather than a kind of like
welcome to poetry.
But I think that really helped with I'm thinking about the gifting thing, like who is this really for? It's for a couple of brothers who live in Bentham, or it's for writers I respect, or collaborators, or
the sort of most emotionally intuitive and the most emotionally successful work is born out of that stuff, I think. That kind of intimate address.
Yeah.
Did you have a question?
Yeah. I wanted to ask, maybe this relates slightly actually to the productivity theme, but I wanted to ask you about like the length of time that this work's kind of been made, from like 2016 up until like the past 6 years. I just wondered how you felt kind of sitting in this iteration of that work, and I know you've sort of previously performed of Benjamin at the time, and I guess I wondered a bit about like that process of like revisiting a text, or thinking there's a different work in this text, or is it that
that things kind of, that you kind of want to go back and re-edit things. Yeah, I just wondered sort of how you've seen the project over like 6 years, and whether it feels like there's actually more to it now you're sat in a space like this, that you want to keep writing in this kind of, in this way.
I think I just work really, really slowly. So like I don't think it's like I made something and then I made it into something new. I think it takes me fucking ages to finish something, and so it was like a kind of gestation period for the work that now I feel like it's finally finished. That makes it sound like it was agonising, which it wasn't. I think it just takes me a very, very long time to feel resolved with something. And like so, and all the work that I've made in the past has kind of been that as well. I produced this Susan Sontag play, which was I think the first kind of big thing that I did that was my own work that I was fully leading, and that took like 5 or 6 years. So I think it is just pace, and maybe some of that confidence thing is like coming to terms with this is my pace. And like Town Hall Meeting of the Air that I made with Kate Liston started in 2017 and finished last year, and we're still kind of working on those ideas. But it being in this show and these works feeling finished feels like I can like put it away now and move on and do something else, and then I can and be in a space which I haven't been in for a very long time, which is that I don't know what that will be, and there are like, and that I can play with little ideas that don't really matter because they're just in scribbly notebooks or something. Yeah, so it feels really nice to have like sealed it or something.
I love that idea though. It's like, how do you choose when to stop accumulating or collecting? I was reading Lisa Robertson on the way up here, and an amazing Canadian poet and prose writer, and she will publish something. She published something 7 years ago, and she's now publishing like a reversioned approach to that text with added work and kind of edited pieces. And between those two publications, she's written loads of new stuff. And I just think it's a really kind of like expansive way of looking at your whole oeuvre or like life in art. Like it just to sort of keep accommodating those ideas and returning to them with like things that are unfinished. And you're never going to finish a poem or a photograph or an exhibition because it will always change with like changing contexts or something. And it's about like time stamping it. I love that kind of question because I find it really hard to sort of let things go or end.
Yeah, and I guess it was also you talking about this as like an archival project, and that there was always kind of feel it ongoing in the sense that you're kind of collecting, and maybe like you see your practice as that, as kind of a collecting, I don't know. But yeah, sort of stem from what you kind of were talking about.
I think there may be also, which is a bit of a lockdown thing, I feel like I've moved on from this work now. They're like of a period of life that is no longer like in process, which is maybe another reason why it's like I feel resolved that this is done now, which I might not have done if the show happened in January 2020. Yeah,
That's cool. Thank you. It's such a nice question. Was there anything else? Cool. Well, thank you everybody for coming and listening so attentively.
Thanks so much for listening.
For filming.
Thank you for the talk.
Yeah.